Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one warns you about. I'm Nikki Jupp, the founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-ups to build the right teams, enabling them to scale with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, CEOs and scale-up leaders share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filler, just honest conversations to help you scale smarter. So let's get into it.
So the first thing is that make sure there's a clear need for the fundraising. It's around growth, it isn't around rescue. Sometimes you have raised money to go and do turnaround, so that doesn't mean to say you don't do that. But I think the message is make sure there's a clear need and a good story, a good growth story, or even in a turnaround it's a growth story. And make sure there's some clear USPs for the business. Because if you don't have those, why would a funder give you the money?
Today's guest is Colin Sykes, an international business leader whose career spans 4 continents, multiple industries and some of the world's most prestigious brands. Colin's the kind of leader who's seen scale from every angle, executive and non-executive, public and private, listed and PE-backed. He's led transformations, steered M&A deals and launched breakthrough innovations in the circular economy, all while staying grounded in governance, strategic clarity and a deep respect for culture and transparency. Now he's channeling that breadth of experience into helping aspirational boards unlock value and drive sustainable growth. If you've ever wondered what it really takes to grow a business beyond borders and into long-term value, you'll want to stick around for this one. So let's get into it. Welcome, Colin. Let's go back.
Yep.
So thinking back over your career so far, which businesses stand out in terms of challenges, those that were struggling to scale or dealing with issues maybe post-scale up? What was happening in the business and what role did you play?
Okay, yeah, every business has its challenges. Obviously I've been fortunate to look at both growth businesses and turnaround businesses. But I'll start with an SME back in about 20 years ago. It was based in Wales. And it had come up with the world's first POS cash security system, where it really effectively took a cash register and it weighed the cash. So every time you opened the drawer and closed the drawer, it worked out how much cash was in there and then matched that to the POS, to the transaction that was happening. So that was a first of its kind in the whole world. And I was asked to join the inventor to work out what do we do with this, because it's a great invention. And the whole idea originally was to just had patents that sell the idea and make him a bit of money, quite a bit of money, and off we go. He had different ideas, so he wanted to commercialize the business because somebody told him, can you imagine how many billions you could sell around the world if you could with this idea, because nobody had this idea. So he was adamant, so off he went, and he underestimated how much that was going to cost, because you've got marketing, you've got rollouts, and you're working with big companies like Target in the US, Walmart, and it just requires a lot. And very quickly he was burning cash so fast, and so I had to step in and stop this cash burn and help me basically turn the business around, which we successfully did. And but it didn't destroy the dream. The dream continued, and the business did eventually exit. And he didn't make as much money as he would have loved to, but he came out quite nicely out of the whole thing. Him and his family came out quite nicely out of the whole thing at the end of the day. But the lesson there was too much too quickly and over-ambitious. So that's one that stands out. Then I've also got a lot of international experience. So there's another one out in Egypt where I was asked to join it as a family business that had gone onto the stock market. It had done a free float, not all of its shares. Some of the shares are going on the stock market. And that brings with it a whole bunch of different dynamics. First of all, he didn't have a management team. It was a family business. And I think I joined him as CFO. He didn't even know what a CFO was. This is $1 billion public company.
And it's not unheard of, is it?
No. So I joined him, and I very quickly went beyond being a CFO. I went into effectively more of a COO. We had to implement we call it an institutionalization program, but it was a change management process which involved over 1,000 people in the whole business. And it was about, are they in the right jobs? Do they have the right tools? Do they have the right stuff to deliver the job? And the strategy was to double the size of this business in 3 years.
Yeah.
Which we did. So we did all that, but we did successfully put this program in place, and that meant we'd had to make some changes in the business, and because you just can't scale up, because it was a big business. The fundamentals are still the same, whether you're a small business or a big business. It's all about the scale up, and you've got to make the people understand what that requires, what's expected of them at the end of the day. So that was another one, and then probably more recently, in the last 2-3 years, another business down in your part of the world it's a shower business. It actually developed a lot of the world's first things in showers, power showers, digital showers, and I joined that business as COO, and one of the tough decisions I had to take at the beginning was to say, look, we've got a new product that's just launched, or about to launch. We're going to have to hold it back a bit because there's something not functioning right, and if it goes to market, that could do quite a lot of damage to the business. Obviously a lot of disappointment in the business. Everybody was raring to go and get the whole thing done, but I had to do a root cause analysis as to what this was all about, which we solved. After 6 months we got that solved, but in that 6-month intervening period, obviously the orders had been placed for this new product, but we still had to make sales, so the business still had to grow, and so we had to juggle the supply chain around, juggle the customers around and get there. But again, we successfully did that. And then we went on to say, right, now we need to grow this business. And because of the type of shower it was, we developed one of the world's, probably the world's first smart shower. And I'd become CEO of the business by then. And there was all sorts of other things, demands coming along. But there was a growth strategy, direction of travel. And when you peel that back, we had to change the commercial strategy, we had to change the operating strategy, we had to change the sourcing strategy. And to do that, I couldn't do it by myself. So I had to set out about getting the right team in place, and people who knew a lot better than I did on how to do these things. There was a couple of people from the original team that stayed, but it was pretty much putting a brand new team in place. And we made a big success of this business that it went on and sold. We sold it for about £138 million. So not a bad result. So there's probably three. You've got other questions, but there's three sort of very different.
For me, the thread that runs through there is, and it's my favourite subject, is the importance of what you're trying to achieve as a business. You have to make sure that those right senior folk are in place. And that requires some tough decisions, not always that people want to take, and maybe we'll talk about that.
But just on that particular, yes, you have to get the right senior people in place, but everybody in this business, everybody in any business matters. It doesn't matter where they are in working, they all make a contribution. So it's about linking all of that together, making sure that your team gets them engaged and gets them enthusiastic and contributes to the success.
And I think that my observation would be, it comes back to leadership. It starts at the top, as in CEO, that then ripples through into the leadership team. You get fantastic leaders in place, that then ripples down, and everyone feels part of, they know how they contribute. And I just want to draw out, because that sparks a memory of mine. You and I spoke many years ago, and I believe it was about that shower company, when you said to me, it was a really important strategy that everyone in the business understood that they make a difference, even those that are, no matter what their role is, whether they're in product management or whether they're in the warehouse. Just share that with me again.
I can't remember the exact conversation, but I think it was all around, when you develop a strategy at the top of the business, you've got to be able to look around you and say, this is a big strategy, there's a lot of things need to be done here. One, I can't do it myself, but two, more importantly, I don't have the capabilities to do that. And so it's about getting everybody in the business to play their part. They've got the expertise, and it's about how do you get I call it joining the dots. So how do you get the dots to join on all these different areas? And you start with your top team, of course, and you make sure that they've got a clear idea, but then you make sure you can cascade that all the way down to the business. And people come into work to make a difference. They want to do well, they want to make a difference. They have their own areas of expertise, and you just got to make sure that it's clear what you're expecting of them. So once they understand what's expected of them, my experience is people will just crack on with it and go beyond actually what you originally were hoping to get out of them.
Yeah, and I think the bit that stuck with me, again, my memories are not fantastic, but there was an element in terms of you would ask questions, and one of your strategies is that you go everywhere inside the business.
Yes, yeah.
And I think I remember you saying something about people understanding there might be I want to say it like a mound of waste, whether it was things that had been thrown away as part of a process.
Yeah.
And you started to ask questions. So why are these thrown away? And it was getting people to understand the cost implications, that they were taking responsibility.
Yeah. So this is just on a light-hearted side. I've been in a few businesses, but one in particular, which was a yacht building business, and I've been known to be rummaging through the waste drums to say what's going out here. And it was an eye-opener because, one, you found out what was being thrown out and didn't need to be thrown out. And two, unfortunately, you found stuff in there which was, when it left the site and went down the road, it was being taken out and off it went into the marketplace. But not everybody does that. I think the key is to look at waste, and even every business I always look at the waste and see what we can do with it. And in many cases, you can actually turn a cost centre into a profit centre with the waste management, and because people a lot of it can be recycled. You can't recycle it, but somebody else can recycle it, and they'll pay you for it, rather than you paying them to get rid of it. And it just goes into landfill. When you pay people to throw the waste out, it goes into landfill. Whereas here, it goes back into something that's going to help the business. So over the last 10 years of my career, I've been really getting focused on recycling and the circular economy. So I've been looking at what can you do in the circular economy to do that. And on that, I've learned from others. A lot of good things are happening out in the world on recycling.
Brilliant. So just using those couple of examples, those few examples, what have those experiences taught you about common obstacles that businesses face as they try to grow at pace?
The biggest obstacle, and it isn't an obstacle, it's just the biggest challenge is trying to go too fast. Too quickly, because that creates its own obstacles, and that could be in very different reasons. In product management or product development, it could mean you're rushing to get something developed and you haven't quite tested, and that was one of the, as I said when I joined the shower business, that was one of the challenges that were there, that they'd just gone too fast and hadn't thought something through, and it took us a couple of months, but we eventually were able to fix it. Sometimes you're trying to push customers to buy a new product, but what you forget is that they've got products on their shelves, they need to sell that through, and there are those sorts of things to happen. Then there's the cash. As I said in my first example, the cash can go very quickly, and you need to preserve cash, because that is you need that to be able to do all the other things. That you've got to be able to buy tooling, you've got to be able to buy expertise, so you've got to pay. So one of the biggest things that we typically do in scale-up businesses, we want to go at pace, and we actually create our own obstacles as opposed to having obstacles. Yes, there are obstacles coming there. Is the market, is the timing right? That cash draw invention that I mentioned about right at the beginning, it was a great idea. It was just probably ahead of its time. People just weren't ready for it. It was a bit expensive. And people just weren't ready for it.
Yeah. So stepped into leadership roles, as I said right at the beginning, pretty much most of the top table roles. At critical turning points in business, what's it like stepping into the founder's gone, stepping into someone else's business during growth or transition?
Sure. First of all, it's a great time to be joining a business. It's good and exciting. It doesn't matter what the circumstances. You can get to them. You can take it over from a founder. You can take it in a turnaround situation. You can take it in a high growth situation. And so there's a lot of things that have already been done. So there's plenty to build on. I think sometimes you're asked to step in where there are challenges.
Yeah.
And I think what you've got to do there is you've got to understand what those are first before you do anything else. Don't rattle the cages until you understand what's clearly going on. And more importantly, what are the frustrations? There'll be a lot of frustrations as to why it's not going It talks about patience earlier, but there'll be frustrations as to why it's not going. And some people in the business might say that area is not going quick enough, or we're not getting the supplies in, or whatever. So I think the first thing, what you really do when you step into these situations, you engage with the team. That's the first thing you do. You have to engage with the team, listen to what they have to say, get an understanding from them, what they think is working, what's not working. Don't form your own opinion until you've actually listened to them. And then what you then sit down and do is you sort out the wood from the trees.
Yeah.
And then you put that into clearly defined priorities and deliverables, and you get the phase right, because most of the time it's just out of sync. So you just put it back into sync, and then you just work out what the direction of travel is, and then just, as I said right at the beginning, leverage from what's already been contributed and just make it happen.
Yeah, and I think it must be interesting when you're coming into a business, whether the team whether there is chaos or whether there is friction. How do you come in? Trust is obviously important.
Sure.
So how do you build that when you go into a business?
So I think, as I said before, you sit down. You have 2 ears. Use them. 2 ears and 1 mouth. So twice as much listening time and 1/3 talking time. So listen to that. But you listen to what they say, but you just don't listen. You also offer some viewpoints. There'll be things that I'll have learned from other businesses and say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Because it can typically trigger something in somebody's mind. Say, I hadn't thought about that. Okay. And that's where you start building that trust, because what people then see, they see that you're engaged. They see that you're interested. They see that you want to understand. You're not there to say, you've got it all wrong. Let's change it around and do it this way. That's not the way to do it. And then they'll, especially if it's your own leadership team, they'll have the areas of their business that they're working with. Let them present their business teams to you. Let them take you there. You listen, understand, because sometimes in that conversation, sometimes somebody in the team will say, yeah, but we haven't thought about this.
Yeah.
And it just may be that they haven't been heard. It's not just inadvertently, it's not deliberate. But again, it's just about triggering things. And that on its own starts building trust, because people then say, so we've got somebody who's they want support. People want to feel supported, they want to feel to be helped. And let's be honest, if it's a technical thing, I'm the worst person to be trying to solve a technical issue. So let the experts do it. But it's about just bringing them together. And sometimes you'll find somebody's just been quiet. They haven't said much. Yeah, and so look for that, and then say, ask that person a question. What do you think? And all of a sudden, you get the confidence that comes out. They've just been too scared to say something in the past. So just bring it out, and off they go. The other thing that I've found helps build trust, not just in management teams, but also encouraging it in the other teams, is have it's a 30-minute weekly meeting where you just stand back and you look at what's been achieved, and you put a few measurables in there. And people love to use this word KPI. People think these words KPIs are financial terms. No, use them as business terms. So what are you trying to measure? What is success? Where do you want to get to from this week to next month? And put those measures in there. And it's not to find out to beat yourself up when it's not working. It's actually to help you understand what is working, what isn't working, and what do we need to do to change that pattern. Yeah.
Can you bring that to life to me? For anyone listening, they may have KPIs in their business, and they may have traditionally used simply financial KPIs.
Yeah.
Let's make that assumption. Give me an example of other things that you might have measured in a particular business or two.
Yeah, so let me take a recent example. I've been chairing a business, and when I joined this business, that had loads of cash in the bank, but its stock, its inventory levels were low, but also its sales was being affected. So it was trying to sell. And a decision had been taken we need to reduce our stock. So it was a financial decision taken. We need to just generate cash. Why are we carrying all the stock and so forth? And what had been clearly misunderstood in that was that actually this is a next day delivery service.
Yes.
And if you don't have the stock, one, you don't get the sale, but two, you lose that sale to a competitor.
Yeah.
So you put a couple of measures in on that, and those measures are that you say, how many weeks stock do I need? You work out the length of time it takes to go from the minute you place the order to the factory, all the way through to when it gets to your customers, onto your customer's shelf. And there'll be all sorts of, there's a few metrics that you put into there. One is obviously there's the OTIF, which is, but secondly, if you take OTIF one stage further, it's you call it OTIF for a completed sale. So if an order comes in for 10 items,
yeah,
people will say, I've delivered 9, so 9 of them have passed the OTIF, but it's actually, no, it's 10. So you make sure that you become very strict with yourself, because that one, again, I've seen this so many times, that one item could actually be costing you a few sales because people want to buy complete items. So it's about getting those metrics in. And so the other favourite one that I would always look at over a weekly, OTIF was one of them, but I would always look at the overdues. So I get people to say, how many deliveries have been overdue this week, and what's the value of them, and who are the customers? And then when that team sits down at the beginning of the week, they sit down and figure out how do they manage that, and do we need to increase the lead time on that particular stock code by a certain thing. So that's one of them. The other is, another one, for example, would be in another business, how many people do we need in the warehouse? Because we're doing dispatches, what's the productivity? And it's about understanding the type of sales that we're making. Are we making them as individual items? How long does it take to pick? How long does it take to pack? And you just measure that. You measure that, and you don't have to do that at a senior management level. In one business, it was fascinating for me because I introduced this measure to them, saying, look, what's your efficiency of picking and packing and getting dispatches up? Because I think we've got too many people here. It's fascinating because 2 or 3 months later, I went into the factory and there was this scoreboard, and they would actually put down everybody's score every week, and it became a competition, and nobody wanted to be at the bottom of that board. There's that. Call centres. In call centres, how quickly do you answer the call? How long do you keep customers holding on there? So it's all those kind of measures. You don't, at senior management level, you'll become aware of them, but actually you make sure that the teams are aware of that, and the call centre will have a television screens with red and green light flashing, and there was always a joke of one company that every time I walked in there, everything went red. I seem to cause it to go red. But let's make a visual. So don't hide these things in a spreadsheet. Put them on the wall. Put them out there.
And it comes full circle to what you were saying. People want to do the work.
Absolutely.
So how is the business, and how am I to measure my success?
Absolutely. And they become very proud of it then.
Yeah. And I see it often when people are coming out of the sort of what I call the scrappy early startup phase, where you're not really looking at these things. You're trying to get minimal viable products, start to generate some revenue. And then once you're saying, okay, we've definitely got something here, we have an opportunity, markets tick, all that stuff is in place, we now need to scale. And it's then starting to look and implement things. What are we measuring? And just make sure you don't measure for just for the sake of measuring. Make sure it's linked to the main goal of the business, because when confidence builds, behaviours change. And people just become so encouraged by everything, and they just deliver more. We go beyond what's expected. Just a question that comes into my mind there. Just an observation, probably in an advisory or a chairman capacity. How many times do you see it that businesses don't revisit the big picture and just keep ploughing on? Because I think all the things that you're talking about there, it is a must do, surely, for your business to be successful.
So you've got to separate day-to-day operations from strategic goals and long-term vision. One of the things that a lot of people do is that they keep on looking at the strategy every single day and saying, we're not making that, so we're going to change the strategy. Don't do that, because you lose the big picture. So what I found typically works well is that every month you do the day-to-day grind, and you look at how you're performing. Once a quarter, or even twice a year, you then say, you have to track against the strategy. So you've got to have some trackers that you measure yourself about direction of travel. How's this working? Because some of these decisions you take will take longer than a month. They'll take a couple of months. So work out when you need to measure them. Work out when should they be kicking and when should they be working, and then you go back and say, has that worked? Obviously, don't leave it too long. A year is probably too long. But what I found, the balance is usually every 3 months, have a little separate session where you have a separate dashboarding, for the want of a better phrase, and say, how are we doing? Is the direction of travel working? Is it working, or do we need to change it? We may need to change it. We may need to refine it. What do we give a bit more time to on that? So keep it separate,
Yeah, people often get stuck in the weeds.
Yeah, and my advice it depends on the size of scale, but as businesses get into SMEs and start growing into that sort of size, then you will have a management team.
Yeah.
What's important is that you make sure the management team puts enough. First of all, they get their teams underneath them, have the faith in them, have the trust in them, delegate that to allow them to do the day-to-day, so that they are freed up to start thinking about the strategic direction. I could just call it direction of travel, really. We all talk, everybody says it's strategy, but just call it direction of travel. And we're in that right direction, and they've got to interact with their colleagues or their peers on that management team to be able to know that, because somebody might be working well in their area, but in another area that may not be working, and so you help them. It's like a team. You just help them and say, what can I do to help you make that happen?
And that comes back to creating a certain kind of culture, doesn't it?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Which we will touch on.
Yeah.
But the sort of the size of business and things like that leads on quite nicely to just jumping in a little bit around fundraising.
Yeah.
I know you have a wealth of experience in this. So you've led and supported fundraising across various businesses, different sizes. From your perspective, what are the essential ingredients that a business needs before they go and raise capital? Obviously, you need to think about the scale.
Sure.
What are your thoughts?
So the first thing is that make sure there's a clear need for the fundraising. It's around growth. It isn't around rescue. Sometimes I have raised money to go and do turnaround, so that doesn't mean to say you don't do that. But I think the message is to make sure there's a clear need and a good story, a good growth story, or even in a turnaround, it's a growth story, and make sure there's some clear USPs for the business. Because if you don't have those, why would a funder give you the money? Because you have to remember, all these funders, they have the money.
Yeah.
They have a lot of choice to be where do I put that money, and they want to be sure that they're going to get the return on their money at the end of the day. The second part of that is that again, key to fundraising is you get the money, but you have the team around you to deliver that. And a funder will always ask that question. We want to know who the management team is, because we really want to know who we're backing. Whether it's even at bank debt level, we want to know who we're backing, because again, it's risk management on their side. At the end of the day, they don't run the business. You're running the business, so you're risking their money on there. The other thing I would say is that, having done all that, another important thing you need to make sure is that the terms of that funding is realistic.
Okay.
Because there's no point in taking money on thinking you're going to pay it back in 2 years. Everybody's always saying, I'm going to borrow money from the bank, I'm going to get them paid off as quickly as we can. Make sure it's realistic, because there are going to be bumps in the road. You don't know what they are, you're going to be bumps in the road, so make sure you've got enough headroom. Everybody gets nervous by bank covenants that come in. Those covenants are not there to trip you up. They're there to flag if there's something not quite working, and what do we need to do about it. It's to make everybody aware, so that we get around the table and try and solve it. And then just make sure you have a plan. You've developed a plan that actually allows the funders to get the return on their money. The plan just says it's a good plan, and they get their required returns on their funds.
And I guess earlier stage businesses, rather than in that the medium size.
Yeah.
Have you seen? I guess my observation would be often people can underestimate and what it's like to have an institutional investor as part of the business.
Oh, absolutely.
So again, for anyone listening who's thinking about that, a couple of things in that. One, what's your observation of how people deal with having an institutional investor, and just shed light on how the expectations on the business change?
Yeah, I think it depends on every business, every investment's different, and it will just depend on the type of investment. In a lot of cases, it's business as usual. Your job is to make that business work, but you cannot ignore the fact that now you've got another stakeholder in the business.
Yeah.
because that's what they are. They want to be sure that they get their part of it back. But and also make sure your priorities remain clear. So make sure that the priorities are clear. You don't change those priorities. Just have those on there. But I think the other thing you've got to do with a new funder is understand what their expectations are.
Yeah.
So sit down right up front, probably even before the money comes in, and say, what do you want from me? What do you expect of me? What am I expecting of you? Be clear about that under there, because that just helps manage the pressures that come on.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a plan and you can write a business plan today and by tomorrow it's out of date.
Yeah.
And at least when you sit down, what funders don't like, they don't like surprises.
Yeah.
And they do understand that things do change. They do understand that market dynamics change. What they are really looking for, and what I've always been able to deliver, is when things change, that you tell them what you're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And that to do that, either I'm going to be able to, the funding is fine, or I may have to change the way I'm returning the money, or we may have to change. So that's typically in what I call turnaround situations, when it gets really bad in terms of the economy and so on. Then you just have to sit down with them. But once you've done that and you sit down with the funders, they are, in my experience of funders, they typically want to understand and listen, because there's a plan.
Yeah.
There's a plan, and they'll be very supportive.
And I think it's about them maintaining the confidence in
Yes.
you and those around you. And I think for less experienced founders and leadership teams, it's important that they have the right people around them who have that experience, if they don't have it, to maintain that confidence. Because I think, again, and tell me if I've got this wrong, in my experience, once that confidence goes, it's incredibly difficult to build it back up
Absolutely,
again.
absolutely right. And that very first example I told you about, the cash register business, that just chewed up cash. So my first job was to go and pay the funders a visit and say, look, and come up with a plan. Here's a plan that I think that will work, and I need your support to make it all happen, and we'll measure it every week. I've been involved in other turnaround businesses out in Spain, where I've assessed the situation, and I've said to the funder, I said, you've got so many millions of pounds in there, but you know something, I need another couple of million to make this work.
Yeah.
But that 2 million will get you your other millions back, and you've got to have the confidence that we'll do that. As I say, every circumstance is different. If you look at the more positive side, if you look at growth companies, sometimes you grow so fast that you need some more money. So it might be working capital, it might be equipment, it might be any of those kinds of funds. But so you always maintain that relationship with your funders. Yeah. They will be there in good times and bad times.
And we've talked quite a bit, unsurprisingly, about the people side.
Yeah.
So what qualities would you look for? And I know every business is different, but just looking at leadership qualities during periods of growth or transformation, are there particular traits that you think are critical in those different phases?
Yeah, so what I look for in people, I guess every leader is probably going to be different here. Sure. But what I look for is, the first thing I'm looking for is accountability, ownership, and good listening skills. But then, not far behind that, I'm looking for strong ethical values, transparency, honesty, because you get it out on the table. We're all together as a team. So I want them to be collaborative. I want them to be able to adapt to the changes, because the world does change. I want them to be able to do that. I want them to have a clear vision and be inspirational. That's what I'd be looking for. And with all of that, then they can actually set some achievable goals for themselves and for the business, and then that'll allow them then to engage with their teams better. The teams will know what they're doing, and then they definitely need to be able to excel at problem solving, because that's why they're there. I always said the reason why I'm here today is because there's bound to be a problem that needs solving. It needs my help. So they need to be able to do that, but they need to do it with clarity, creativity. People look at problems, they always think on the negative. Look at it optimistically. Yeah, it's great solving a problem, because from that generates a lot of success comes on that there. we talked about change management earlier on. They need to be able to navigate change. As I say, they've got to be adaptable to their. And then probably the final in all of this is they need to have the ability to take decisions. So you don't want them to know, that's what they're there for. You want them to take decisions. Otherwise, you're going to make all the decisions, and then that doesn't help. You've got to get them engaged.
And often when you come into businesses, that there's an existing leadership team.
Yeah.
And you're coming in to your words either to address problems. So something's not working, or there's a need for transformation. In your experience, do you find that there are certain leaders that are better at different stages of business?
Yeah, I think we all improve as we go along. And one of the biggest reasons why you improve is because, I speak for myself here, but you make mistakes.
Yeah.
And you learn more from those mistakes than you do from just the run-of-the-mill stuff. So you really benefit from those mistakes. And so you change. Your style changes. You learn a lot. So experience brings a lot of things as well. Each personalities come into it. Always, people have different personalities, and your job is to make sure that you accommodate all those different personalities. You better to always agree with them. But you have to respect them, and you have to engage them, because the other thing that I think is really good as you go along, what you learn is that when you have differences, or anything different is a good thing.
Yeah.
And if everyone around the table has a different point of view, it might be a strong debate, but you'll come out of it with a healthy solution at the end of the day. So differences and mistakes are probably the two things that stand out for me as to how you develop in your career over the years.
Yeah, and I think if you've got that and sprinkled on respectful debate, respecting the fact that you're going to come with different views, then it's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No one wants to sit there with everybody nodding.
Yeah, you don't want that. You want to be able to say, what do you think?
Yeah.
I have my own views, but as a leader, at the end of the day, you'll have to take you're ultimately the decision maker. The ultimate, the buck stops there. But you don't do it without letting other people get engaged with you, and actually, they're going to be part of that decision.
Absolutely. So, what about when you've come in and you've just thought, that I'm talking very specifically here, sticking on the people subject. You've come in and doing what you said earlier. You're starting to unpack things, you're starting to have conversations. What about when you've got to make some tough decisions about particular people?
Yeah.
How do you make those decisions, and what process do you go through?
Yeah, so the first thing you always do is you get, as I think I said earlier, you get to understand the whole thing. But there will come a time where you'll realise something is not working, and the first thing you've got to decide before you throw the baby out with the bathwater is, can that person, is it just a round peg in a square hole situation? Do they just need to be developed? Do they need a bit of change in what they're doing? Do they have the right attitude? Attitude is key here. And so I start off with, is that person developable?
Yep.
If they are, you're better off investing in that than trying to go through a whole recruitment process, because But if that doesn't work, then you really do have to just sit down, face the facts, and just say to that person, look, you're great at what you do, but it doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit here. It's not going to work for us here. And you have a frank conversation. You have an open, honest conversation with that person, and there typically becomes an understanding then, and then you just figure it out from there. But you don't take too long. So I say all these things because they're developable, all these sorts of things. But what you don't do is you don't wait. You don't wait. So what you do is you set some clear goals for them. So you say, look, these are the things. And don't be afraid to say to somebody, look, I think we need to change the way you're doing something. If they're not delivering, let them know they're not delivering. Yeah. Think of a football team. If somebody makes a mistake on the pitch, the goalkeeper, for example, will always shout. Yeah. Doesn't mean nothing personal about it.
Yes.
Just, you didn't see that, because we all have blind spots.
Really interesting, and I like that. I like the analogy. When you're on the pitch, whatever pitch that is, you've got your game face on,
exactly,
and you're in it together, and you're clear, you're open with each other. And when you come off, it's pat on the back,
exactly,
and you move on. No, it's not as simple as that.
No, but there are circumstances where you have to make the change, and don't be afraid to make that change, because if I have to say something, again, this comes with experience. When you make these tough decisions, you always look back and say, why did I not do it sooner?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Not just for us, not just for the sake of the business, but for the sake of the person themselves. At the end of the day, it's also for the benefit of the most important, it's for the benefit of the person. Yeah. Let them go and, as I say, people come to work to make a difference, and let them make a difference, but they may just be in the wrong place.
And there's a fair and kind way to do it, isn't there?
Yeah,
the result might not be
yeah.
what someone wants, but ultimately it can be done respectfally.
Absolutely,
So.
it should always be done respectfully. It should always be done in the right way, and because you never know, down the line, you might be in another business where you think, that person, that was a good skill set, just wasn't in the wrong place.
Yeah, and it's that, isn't it? Often when I'm in conversations with businesses, is someone can have the right skill set, the right experience. Yeah. It's contextual in your environment. Yeah. It's just not going to work. Yeah. So moving on now, just getting towards the end, but thinking about frameworks or models that that have consistently helped guide you through either growth challenges again or transformation, because you're experienced in both areas.
Yeah. There's lots of models out there. There's lots of tools out there. If you think some of the ones the ones that make a lot of sense to me are things like the Porter's 5 Forces, the BCG matrix, the ANSOF matrix, value proposition, and value chain. So it's about, and all of these is about. It's about working out. It's about working out where the strengths and weaknesses are. And rather than call them strengths, rather than call them weaknesses, challenges. So how do you manage them? But actually, those challenges, what are the opportunities? So by using these tools, you're almost forcing yourself to have to put something in those boxes. And then you say, have I got it right? Is that right? Does that make sense? Is there another one that should go in there? So those are the frameworks that kind of make you think. Yeah. Just to get you thinking on there. But there are the other thing that we call a strategic plan. The new phrase right now is called value creation plans. Yeah, but those are, a lot of people think at the beginning those are, again, it's just another financial thing, that no, they're not meant to be that. What they are, they're actually there to work out what value can you create in the areas that you're working on. So you take each department through those areas and say, how can we create value? And we talked about waste earlier. You can create value in waste. Yeah. You could create value in production through production efficiencies. If you do it more this way, there might be machinery. If you bought that machine, so I'm involved in a glass tempering business, and they have to drill holes in the glass. If it's done manually, it takes 10 times longer than if you spent some money on a machine and made it 10 times quicker. So these are all part of that value creation plan, because if you can get them out 10 times quicker, you might sell 10 times more. You may not, but you may sell 10 times more. So it's about using those tools and those frameworks to do that, and they'll be different for different parts of the business. Yeah. As well. I talked earlier about solving that root cause analysis. What do you call it? There's this little tree that you say that's the problem. There's all sorts of different things that come out of it, and I forgot what the name of it is, but I use that a lot as well. It's part of the thinking.
Real strong business fundamentals.
Yeah. Correct, yeah.
And I was going to say something then. It's gone out of my mind. It'll come back. Do you have any sort of shortcuts when you come in and you're addressing a complex problem where you go, it's your go-to?
So, I think sometimes the Americans have a lovely saying called paralysis by analysis. So don't overthink it. I think you need to get focused. You need to work out what the initial needs are. You need to use your knowledge, you need to use your experience, you need to minimize that unnecessary analysis. So you will need to do some analysis, you will need to do some thinking, but sometimes if you make a quick decision, it may not be perfect, but actually it may make things move forward and may help you understand the next things. Sometimes it's gut feel. You've got to be careful of gut feel, because obviously shooting from the hip can be sometimes very good. Some people are very good at it. Some of us are a bit more risk averse towards that sort of approach, but don't be careful how long you deliberate over that problem. Think about what is it you're trying to achieve, and then what's the best way of getting there.
Yeah. So I've got a quick fire for you, fire round here.
Yeah.
So the number one every CEO or CFO should always have a grip on?
It's going to always come down to this famous word called EBITDA. Because you can have as much sales as you want if you're not getting the margins, if you're not getting the profits, if you're not managing the costs. So it just comes down to EBITDA.
And also that comes full circle with that what you're measuring.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly.
And helping everyone to understand which bits are important,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
exactly.
layering on that value creation, what we're measuring in each of the areas.
Yeah, exactly. It's what joins the dots at the end of the day. Whether it's your funder, whether it's a stock market business, whether it's within the organisation, it's what joins everybody at the hip.
Yeah. What's the most underrated quality in a great leadership team?
So I think it's humility and empathy. I think that's just always underrated. People expecting the boss to be on fire the whole time. So what you find a lot of CEOs I see is they are humble. They might come out fiery, but actually beneath all of that, there's a lot of humility and they're very humble.
For me, they're the best ones.
Yeah.
And they tend to have successful businesses.
Yeah.
The biggest mistake scale-up businesses make during a growth spurt?
I think I've probably said this earlier on, but it's trying to do too much at once.
Yeah.
Just try and take on too much just to take on too much.
Yeah. And the one piece of advice you'd wish someone had given you in your early career?
Yeah, be more patient. So, yeah. Just be patient. It will come. It comes.
Yeah.
You get frustrated, but just be more patient. And because if you stand back and think it through, you'll come up with the answer.
So what about, for anyone listening who's about to step into a leadership role in a business that's got potential for high growth, whether we call it a scale-up or high growth, and they're considering bringing someone new into their leadership team, what would you want them to think about carefully before making that decision?
You're thinking about the person that's coming into that position. Yeah, I think you just need to be, first of all, it's got to align with their objectives. So it does align with their objectives, because we can very quickly get attracted by something that's really nice out there. But feet on the ground, does it align with your objectives? Especially in scale-ups. And I say this especially in scale-ups. People always talk, there's a lot of talk these days about the work-life balance. I'm afraid in a scale-up, it'll be more the former than the latter. Just think that through. Are you prepared for that? Not is it just you are prepared for that. Is it home, people around you, your home support mechanism, are they ready for it? Or are they expecting you to spend more life balance being at home? Yeah, so that's really important. Just make sure, because it is going to be it's a big stepping stone for you on that there. I said this before, part of the process is making mistakes. So don't let that. Obviously, it's not the mistakes you make; it's how you fix them.
Yeah.
It's how you deal with them. It's how you manage them. At the end of the day, I've also said this before. It takes longer than patience.
Yeah.
It is going to take longer. It is just going to be. I think the other thing is, as you step into that next role, you are going to have to make some gut feel decisions. Sometimes you have to go with your gut. You'll get all this analysis given to you. Get all these. You have to say, yeah, but I think I'm going to have to do it this way. And there are just some times where you're just going to have to make those decisions on there. And I think it just comes down to the patience thing. But again, go into these roles, make sure it's what you want to do. Enjoy it, because yes, it can sometimes be a bit daunting. It can be a bit scary. But most of all, make sure you want to. It's enjoyed. Make sure it's something that you want to do.
Yeah, because the amount of time you spend at work.
You spend many hours at work.
Yeah.
You spend a third of your life at work.
Yes.
A third of your day at work, rather. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, some of us are fortunate to spend less time, less years at work, and others have to work a bit longer.
And one final question, Colin, just to draw it to a close. What's a myth that you'd like to bust about scaling a business?
Growth is going to solve all my cash flow problems. Everybody thinks more sales is going to solve the cash flow problems. It doesn't. It can actually create cash flow problems for a business. I think, as I said, one of those examples right at the beginning. And I think the reason why that kind of exists is it's a lack of understanding of what goes into growth.
Yeah.
So not ready for it, or just people are not ready. And So it isn't just about selling more. It isn't just about putting more structure in. Again, that first business was about I'm going to need more product management, I'm going to need more of this, I'm going to need more of that, and spending the money. Supply chains and tools, these all need cash up front.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're better off just slowing the pace down. Again, I said the word many times today, it's called patience.
Yeah.
Have the patience. I know there's people out there who say, yeah, but we'll lose our advantage in the marketplace. It's all a balance. So even in those situations, there has to be some patience there as well.
Yeah. Superb. Thank you.
No problem.
That was absolutely awesome. So many things packed in there. Yeah. Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. So I will draw it to a close.
Great.
Big thank you. Anyone who's listening, I will put all Colin's details into the description so that you can reach out to Colin via LinkedIn, or there'll be contact details in there. As we touched on at the beginning, Colin at the moment operates in advisory chairman roles, and I'm sure he'd be open to conversations. And as you've learned through this conversation, there is much knowledge there, and I know for a fact Colin is very giving with his time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So that's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. And if you got value from today's conversation, hit the subscribe and leave a comment. It helps us bring even more real stories your way. Got a scale-up challenge, a story to share, or you want to recommend that someone that I should interview? Take a look at the link to the website in the description below. All the details for today's guest will also be listed in the description. But until the next time, keep scaling, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone on your scale-up journey.